It was just past midnight when I finished my last delivery and started driving home. The city felt strange at that hour, hollow in a way that made every sound sharper, every shadow deeper. The streets were mostly empty, with only a few streetlights flickering weakly, leaving long stretches of darkness in between. I turned onto the access road that led to my apartment. A narrow, poorly maintained lane that cut through a wooded area on one side and empty lots on the other. The road was cracked in places, gravel spilling over the edges, and in the weak glow of my headlights, it looked like a scene waiting for something bad to happen. The air was cold and damp, carrying the smell of wet earth and oil from cars long gone. My tires crunched over loose gravel as I drove slowly, and I kept the radio on low, more to fill the silence than for music. But the soft music didn't help. There was a weight to the night, the kind that presses down in your chest and makes your ears pick up every tiny sound. The rustling of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, a bird startled into flight. I kept checking my mirrors, scanning the road ahead and behind me, even though there was no reason to be afraid. That sense of unease is subtle at first, almost easy to ignore, but then it builds and you can't shake it. About 15 minutes in, I noticed something unusual near the side of the road. At first, I thought it was just a dark patch, maybe a pothole or a fallen branch. But as I drove closer, I realized it was a person. They were lying on the edge of the road, half in the grass, half on the gravel. Next to them was a small electric scooter, tipped over, one wheel spinning in a shallow puddle from the earlier rain. My stomach sank. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding slightly, and parked a few feet away. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and stepped out into the cold night. The person wasn't moving. At first glance, it looked like they were sleeping or had passed out. But the way their body was twisted and the stillness of their chest told me it was serious. I crouched down to check for a pulse, feeling the wet grass seep into my shoes. Their skin was cold and clammy, and their breathing was shallow, barely noticeable. I cursed under my breath. They were alive, but just barely. My mind raced, unsure whether to try moving them or wait for help. I had to make the right choice quickly. I dialed 911, my fingers trembling. I gave the dispatcher my location and described the situation. I followed their instructions, checking the boy's pulse, keeping his head steady, and trying to keep him awake. Every minute that passed felt like 10. I kept rubbing his arms gently, hoping to get some response, but his eyes stayed closed. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees around us, making long shadows across the road. The cold was biting through my jacket, numbing my hands and legs, but I didn't notice. My focus was entirely on him, on keeping him alive until help arrived. Then I heard laughter and shouting further down the road. A group of people was staggering toward the curve, clearly drunk. I immediately recognized them as the boys' friends. They were oblivious to the fact that one of their own was lying injured behind them. I waved my arms, shouted, did everything I could, but they didn't notice. They kept moving, disappearing into the darkness. My stomach twisted. How could they not see him? How could they walk past someone in danger like that? I felt a mix of anger, fear, and helplessness that pressed down on me so heavily I thought I might collapse myself. I forced myself to focus back on the boy. I kept checking his pulse, listening to his shallow breaths, rubbing his arms, and whispering encouragement even though he couldn't respond. The minutes dragged on. Every sound felt exaggerated. The creak of a tree branch, the distant bark of a dog, the hum of a car engine somewhere far off. I tried to ignore the shadows that seemed to stretch and move around me, to keep my mind on what I could control. His survival. Then I saw it, red and blue lights flashing in the distance. Relief surged through me. The ambulance was here. I ran a few steps toward it, waving frantically. The vehicle slowed as it approached, and two paramedics jumped out, moving quickly to the boy. They assessed him with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, stabilizing his neck, and preparing him for transport. I gave them a brief rundown of what happened, my voice shaky but precise, and they immediately took over. I watched them lift him onto the stretcher, securing him carefully, and then slide him into the back of the ambulance. The doors shut, the siren blaring as it sped off down the road toward the hospital. I stood there, the cold wind whipping against me, feeling both relief and exhaustion wash over me. My hands were still shaking, my heart still pounding, but I knew I had done everything I could. The boy was now in the hands of professionals, and that was all I could hope for. I got back into my car, driving the remaining distance home slowly, my mind replaying the events over and over. I kept thinking about how fragile life is, how accidents can happen in an instant, and how people often fail to notice danger until it's too late. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the first faint hints of dawn were just starting to touch the horizon. I sat in my car for a long time before turning off the engine, feeling the weight of the night pressing on me. The memory of him lying there, pale and barely breathing, and his friends walking past without noticing, stayed with me. I went inside, poured a glass of water, and tried to steady my thoughts. Sleep didn't come easily. Every small sound, creaking floorboards, wind against the windows, made me tense. I kept thinking about the boy, hoping the paramedics got him to the hospital in time, hoping he would survive. I told myself I had done everything I could, and that someone now had the chance to help him. But the image of that night stayed with me. The darkness of the road, the shadows of the trees, the cold air, the helplessness. It took hours before I finally drifted into a restless sleep, haunted not by ghosts or monsters, but by the reality of how quickly life can be in danger and how often people fail to notice until it's nearly too late. When I woke, the sun was higher, casting warm light over the neighborhood, and I felt a small sense of relief. The night had been terrifying, but there was hope. The boy was alive. I had made a difference, and that thought, however heavy the memory of the night remained, stayed with me. Even weeks later, I would think back to that road, to the shadows, to the fleeting moments when life and death balanced on a knife edge, and I would remember how fragile everything is, how quickly things can change, and how sometimes being in the right place at the right time can make all the difference. I still think about that night sometimes, usually when I'm driving a long empty highway after dark. The whole thing happened so quietly, with no big dramatic moment, no loud warning, nothing you'd expect from a movie. It was all small details, little moments that didn't seem important until they lined up into something I couldn't ignore. And when I think back on it, I keep telling myself the same thing. Calling the police was the right decision. Even if it turned out to be nothing, it was better than sitting there doing nothing at all. It started on a long drive through Colorado, heading west on I-70 toward Utah. The sky was already turning black by the time I reached the first gas station. I'd been driving since the afternoon, and the hours on the highway had worn me down. My shoulders felt tight, my eyes were dry, and all I wanted was to fill up, grab something simple to eat, and maybe stretch before getting back on the road. The station sat by itself, surrounded by flat land and the dark shapes of distant hills. The lights around the pumps were bright and cold, buzzing lightly in the quiet air. I pulled in, parked, and stepped out, feeling the sudden chill of the evening. My fingers felt stiff as I grabbed the pump and started fueling the car. That's when I noticed them, two young women near the next pump over. They looked happy, relaxed, just on a road trip together. One of them was unpacking snacks from a bag. The other was stretching out her legs. They had that carefree look people get when they're far from home but not worried about anything at all. It actually made me smile for a second. But the smile faded when I noticed the man on the other side of them. He looked about mid-40s, rough face, a big old truck, worn clothes. None of that was strange. What bothered me was his eyes. He wasn't fueling his truck. He wasn't moving. He was standing there completely still, staring at those two women like everything else around him had disappeared. His shoulders were tense, his eyes didn't blink, and he didn't even look away when I walked past. I tried to brush it off. People stare sometimes. Maybe he was tired. Maybe his mind was somewhere else. I didn't want to assume anything, so I shrugged it off and headed inside to grab food for the next few hours of driving. When I came back out, all three vehicles were gone. The truck and the women's car. That felt strange, because they had looked like they'd just gotten there. But again, I let it go and told myself I was just tired. I decided to rest for a bit before getting back behind the wheel. I leaned my seat back, closed my eyes, and let myself drift for maybe an hour. When I felt awake enough, I got back onto the highway. The next stretch was long and mostly empty. I sped more than I should have, trying to make good time before fatigue crept in again. After a couple hours, I saw another small gas station up ahead and decided to stop again to stretch and maybe wash my face. As soon as I pulled in, I froze for a moment. The same two women were there. They were sitting at a little picnic table beside the gas station, eating something and looking relaxed, like they'd been there a while. Their car was parked near the pump, and it didn't look like they were in any rush. I didn't see the older man anywhere, but honestly, I wasn't looking for him. I was just surprised to see the women again after being hours down the road. I walked inside, took a few minutes to stretch and wander around, then came back out. I leaned against my car, sipping a drink, and watched them for a moment. I didn't mean to stare, but I was curious how they had gotten ahead of me when I'd been speeding the whole way. Maybe I missed an exit. Maybe they took a different route. Plenty of ways to explain it. While they were finishing up and getting ready to leave, something caught my eye. In the next parking lot over, maybe 100 feet away, a pair of headlights flicked on. I recognized the truck instantly. It was the same one from earlier, the same man sitting behind the wheel, the same old faded pickup, the same silhouette of his head barely moving. He didn't pull out immediately. He waited until the women started driving away, and then he followed them out of the lot, leaving at the exact same moment. My stomach tightened a little. The thought that it was a coincidence crossed my mind, but the feeling in my gut told me something else. The timing was too perfect, too clean, too exact. I forced myself to stay calm. I finished my drink, threw the trash away, and got back into my car. I waited a few minutes before leaving. I didn't want to be part of whatever was going on. When I finally got back onto the road, I drove normally for a bit before speeding up to catch sight of them in the distance. The highway was dark, open, and quiet, with barely any traffic. And up ahead, in the glow of their taillights, I could see the truck. The older man was driving right behind the women's car, so close it looked like he could almost touch their bumper. His high beams were on, flooding their back window with bright white light. The scene looked wrong, aggressive, focused, like he wanted them to know he was there but didn't want to give them room to escape. I slowed a little and kept far back. I didn't want him to notice me. I didn't want to get drawn into whatever this was. I stayed just close enough to see what was happening. About 10 minutes later, the women's car pulled onto a wide gravel turnout on the side of the road. It looked like they were trying to get him off their tail, maybe hoping he'd just pass them and keep going. And he did. The truck kept driving straight without slowing down even a little, disappearing slowly into the dark. I felt a small rush of relief for them. I kept going straight too, trying to put distance between us. But about a mile down the highway, I saw something that made the relief vanish instantly. The truck was parked on the shoulder. No hazards on. No lights. Just sitting there, waiting. When I passed him, I felt a cold pulse of adrenaline hit my chest. I drove another mile and pulled off onto a large flat dirt patch so I could watch behind me without being too close. My hands were shaking a bit. I didn't know exactly what I expected, but I kept my eyes fixed on the road. 2 minutes later, the women drove by. A few seconds after that, the truck pulled onto the road again. He was following them. That was it for me. All the little things came together, the staring at the first gas station, the way he waited in the shadows at the second one, the high beams, the weird stopping, the perfect timing every single time. Maybe each moment alone could be explained, but all of them together painted a picture I couldn't ignore. Even if I was wrong, even if I was overreacting, I couldn't just keep driving and pretend it wasn't happening. I pulled back onto the road, stayed a safe distance behind, took a deep breath, and called the police. My voice shook a little from the mix of adrenaline and fear, but I stayed calm enough to explain the situation. 15 minutes later, blue and red lights appeared far ahead. They pulled the truck over. The women kept driving, probably not even knowing how close that man had been behind them. As I passed the scene, the truck sat on the shoulder with 2 police cars behind it. The man was standing outside his door. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anything, just stared straight ahead like he was annoyed the world had interrupted him. I kept driving west, back into the dark, back onto the empty road. I don't know what happened after that. Maybe it really was nothing. Maybe he was harmless. Maybe everything I saw added up to a coincidence stacked on another coincidence. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe those small things meant something bigger, something dangerous, something those women never even realized was creeping closer to them mile after mile. All I know is that calling the police didn't hurt anyone. The man wasn't harmed. The women weren't aware of the danger. And if things were headed somewhere bad, then at least someone stepped in before it got that far. Better safe than sorry. And as I drove deeper into the night, the empty road stretching endlessly ahead of me, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear that I'd witnessed something dark unfolding in real time, and relief that maybe, just maybe, that single call kept something terrible from happening out there in the quiet darkness of I-70. I've driven long stretches of highway at night before, but nothing quite prepared me for that night on I-70. It started as an ordinary trip west through Colorado, heading toward Utah. The sun had already set, and the sky above the Rockies was turning that deep, heavy blue that always makes the landscape look endless and quiet. I had been driving for hours, my eyes dry, my shoulders tight from the constant tension of holding the wheel steady at high speeds. I planned to push through as far as I could that evening, but by the time I reached the first gas station around 8 o'clock, I was craving a break, a hot drink, and some fuel. The station was small, almost isolated, surrounded by flat land and the shadowed outlines of distant hills. Its lights were harsh, the kind that bleached everything into a pale glare under the dark sky. I parked near a pump and stepped out. The air was colder than I expected, crisp and sharp, biting at my face and hands as I started fueling the car. That's when I noticed them. 2 young women on the other side of the pumps. They looked carefree, laughing at something small and insignificant, stretching their legs, shifting between bags and drinks, completely unaware of the quiet tension that was about to set in. Their car was neat and parked by the pump, but the relaxed way they moved, the ease of their gestures, made it clear they had been traveling together for hours, just enjoying the trip. And then I noticed him. The man standing at the next pump overcaught my attention immediately. He looked to be in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. His clothes were worn, the kind of faded jeans and jacket that suggested he spent more time on the road than anywhere else. But what unsettled me wasn't his age or his clothing. It was the way he was staring. He wasn't pumping gas. He wasn't looking around. He was standing still, frozen, his gaze locked entirely on the 2 women. Every movement of the world around him seemed to vanish, his eyes following them as if nothing else existed. There was a stiffness to his posture, a strange tension that made me instinctively step back, even though I wasn't sure why. I wanted to ignore it, to convince myself I was imagining things. People watch each other all the time, right? But there was something off about the intensity in his eyes, the way he didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't notice anything else. It wasn't a glance. It was a fixed focus, and it made the hair on my neck stand up. I decided to go inside, telling myself I just needed a snack and a few minutes off my feet. I grabbed a bottle of water, a protein bar, and a coffee. When I returned to my car, the women and the man were gone. I didn't dwell on it too long. People move around. Maybe they left at the same time. I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes, and let the hum of the engine and the steady glow of the station lights lull me into a short nap. An hour later, I was back on the road, pushing the car faster than I should have, trying to make up for lost time. Hours passed. The highway stretched on, dark and open, with only the faint outline of mountains and the occasional reflective marker guiding me. My eyes were strained, and the fatigue was creeping back. That's when I spotted the next small gas station and decided to stop for another break. I pulled in, slowed, and almost froze. The 2 women were there. They were sitting at a picnic table near the pumps, eating something, moving with the same relaxed energy I'd noticed hours earlier. They hadn't changed cars. They weren't rushing. They looked like they'd been there for a while, just taking a casual break on the side of the highway. I didn't see the man. I wasn't actively looking, but even so, something in my gut told me he wasn't far behind. I parked a few spots away, leaned against my car, and just watched them for a moment. There was no way I could shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the earlier encounter hadn't been random. Then I saw the headlights. A white pickup truck flicked on its lights in the next parking lot over. I recognized it immediately. It was him, the same man, the same truck, the same frozen gaze I'd seen at the first station. He didn't move at first. He waited, silently, until the women got into their car and started to leave. Then he followed, sliding smoothly onto the highway behind them. My chest tightened. I had to think fast. All the little coincidences. The stare at the first station, his sudden disappearance, his timing at this station. Everything added up to something I couldn't ignore. Even if I was overreacting, even if it was just an odd coincidence, I couldn't just let it happen without alerting someone. I stayed back, a safe distance behind him, and dialed the police. My hands shook as I explained the situation, giving them the locations, the description of the vehicles, and the direction of travel. The highway was empty, the radio buzzing softly, the engine humming under my fingers. Minutes later, blue and red lights appeared far ahead on the road. Relief hit me in a wave so strong I had to blink a few times to make it real. The truck pulled over. The man stepped out, hands empty, face tense, glaring straight ahead. He didn't look at me, didn't look at anything in particular, just stopped because he had no choice. The women drove past safely, probably unaware of how close danger had been to them. The police approached the truck cautiously, checking everything they needed to. I kept driving behind them for a while, making sure the situation didn't change. My pulse was still racing, my mind spinning with how easily it could have gone wrong. I couldn't help thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't been alert, if I had assumed it was just a coincidence and stayed silent. Those women could have been in real danger, out on that stretch of highway late at night, isolated and completely unaware of the man following them. Who knows what could have happened? The thought made my stomach twist, even hours later. When I finally continued on my journey, the highway stretched on, long and empty under the black sky. The relief I felt was heavy, mixed with a lingering anxiety. I kept replaying everything in my mind, trying to reassure myself that I'd done the right thing, that calling the police had prevented something bad from becoming horrific. And I kept thinking, better to be overcautious in a situation like that than to ignore the warning signs and hope for the best. That night stayed with me, not because of a jump scare or a dramatic confrontation, but because of the weight of realizing how quickly things could have gone wrong. And somewhere out there, I like to think those women went home safely, none the wiser, thanks to one decision to act instead of assuming it was nothing. Driving the rest of the way into Utah, I kept my hands tight on the wheel, my eyes scanning the road ahead. The mountains rose dark and silent around me, and the highway stretched endlessly under the stars. I didn't speed after that, didn't relax for a long while, because I knew how quickly things could turn dangerous on a quiet night. But I also knew that I had done everything I could. I had been alert, aware, and willing to act. And in the end, I had prevented something that could have turned from bad to horrific from ever happening. I don't know if the man ever faced any real consequences beyond that night. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't called the police. But I do know this: every decision we make to intervene in a situation like that, even when it seems like a small, uncertain choice, can save lives. That thought stayed with me long after the highway faded behind me, and I think about it every time I drive at night, every time I see someone vulnerable in a quiet, isolated place. Sometimes, being alert, careful, and willing to act is the only thing standing between safety and tragedy. And that night, I did what I could. I had finished a long shift driving for a rideshare service, the kind of night where the streets feel emptier than usual, and the air carries that faint, biting chill that warns of winter around the corner. My car felt heavier than normal, as if the weight of the day had settled into the seats with me. It was just past 3 in the morning, and the roads near my apartment were quiet, almost eerily silent. I was taking the usual access road that cuts through a stretch of old industrial buildings to get home faster, a shortcut I've used 100 times, but tonight it felt different. The kind of different that you can't quite name until it's right in front of you. The headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating the cracked asphalt and the patches of weeds growing through the concrete like stubborn green veins. The streetlights were sparse and flickering, and in the distance, I could see the dim outlines of warehouses, their rusted roofs catching the faint light of the moon. I was halfway down the road when I noticed something on the side. A figure lying completely still next to one of those rented electric scooters people leave scattered around the city. At first, I thought it was one of the scooters fallen over, but the shape didn't match. My stomach tightened. I slowed the car and pulled over, the engine rumbling faintly in the quiet. My eyes adjusted, and I realized it wasn't just a person lying down. It was a young man, maybe in his early 20s. His body was twisted unnaturally, his arm bent at a strange angle. Panic laced through me, but I tried to stay calm. I stepped out of the car, the cold biting at my hands, and my shoes crunching on gravel and broken glass. I crouched down, checking for a pulse, but I couldn't feel anything through the thick coat he was wearing. I noticed a group of people further down the road, stumbling and swaying, laughing loudly, their voices carrying in the otherwise empty night. They were clearly drunk, probably his friends. I waved my hands frantically, shouting to get their attention. Their laughter faltered when they saw me, but instead of coming over, they looked at the body and then back at each other, hesitating. One of them finally took a half-hearted step toward the young man, then shook his head, and they all just staggered off down the road, leaving him there. My chest tightened with frustration and anger. I knew I couldn't leave him like that. I pulled out my phone and called 911, my fingers trembling. The operator's voice was calm, professional, asking questions I barely had the presence of mind to answer. I gave them the location, described the scene, and stayed on the line while they told me help was on the way. I could hear the young man breathing shallowly, or maybe it was just the wind. I wasn't sure, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. I looked around, my eyes catching every shadow, every shape in the dim glow of the streetlights, feeling the unnatural silence of a part of the city that wakes only when the night is at its darkest. Minutes felt like hours. The cold seeped through my jacket, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. I tried to make him more comfortable, moving a broken piece of glass away from his hand, adjusting his jacket so he wasn't lying directly on the gravel. I kept glancing down the road, half expecting the drunk group to come back, or for someone else to appear. Every distant noise made me flinch. The rumble of a truck engine, the scrape of tires on pavement, the occasional bark of a dog somewhere behind the warehouses. My mind raced through every possibility, every scenario that could have led to this. He could have fallen from the scooter, hit his head, maybe even been left behind by friends too drunk to notice. When the ambulance finally arrived, the flashing lights cutting through the darkness like sharp knives, I felt a mix of relief and lingering dread. Paramedics jumped out, assessing the situation quickly and efficiently, and I stepped back to give them space. They worked silently, checking vital signs, carefully lifting him onto a stretcher. I watched as they loaded him into the back of the ambulance. I didn't follow them. The siren's wail faded down the road, leaving me standing there in the cold, staring at the empty space where he had been. Driving home after that, the city felt heavier somehow, each street darker, the streetlights seeming more distant than before. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, and I found myself double-checking every intersection, every curve. It wasn't fear of someone else being there. It was the echo of what I had just witnessed, the randomness of it. One moment, life is normal. The next, someone's existence can hinge on the thin line between awareness and negligence. I parked my car and sat there for a long time before getting out. My apartment building was quiet, every step echoing in the stairwell. I kept thinking about the young man, hoping he had made it, wondering if he would remember the last moments before he ended up on that cracked asphalt. I checked the news the next morning, scanning through police reports, hoping for some closure. There was a short note about a scooter accident, an underage drinker seriously injured, friends facing charges for leaving the scene. That was it. No names, no faces, just a paragraph that barely captured what had happened. The memory of that night stayed with me, replaying in my mind every time I drove alone at night. I started taking different routes home, ones that felt less desolate, less empty, but the image of the body next to the scooter kept coming back. It changed the way I saw the streets after dark. Every abandoned alley, every flickering streetlight, every shadow in the corner of my eye now carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. I realized, in those moments of quiet reflection, that the night can be deceptive. It can make you feel isolated, give a false sense of security, and make small mistakes feel enormous. That night didn't involve ghosts, monsters, or myths. It was just life, messy, unpredictable, and sometimes terrifyingly indifferent. And yet, amidst all that, I had played a small part in making sure someone got help, a reminder that even in a chaotic world, human action matters. Months later, I finally saw him again in a way. A news story covered the recovery of a young man from a severe scooter accident. He had survived, with months of physical therapy ahead, but he was alive. I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion wash over me. I hadn't been a hero. I had just done what anyone could do if they were paying attention. But that was enough. It was enough to make me believe, however faintly, that the night, in all its randomness and darkness, could still hold moments of clarity, of consequence, and of survival. Driving home that night, the streets felt the same, yet somehow different. I still saw the shadows, the flickering lights, the emptiness. But I also saw the potential for action, for awareness, and for small acts that could change the course of a life. It made me a little more vigilant, a little more human in a city that often feels anything but. The memory never left me, but it became a reminder. Not of fear, not of despair, but of the fragile thread that connects us all, and the quiet power of noticing when it matters most. I had finished a long shift driving for a rideshare service, the kind of night where the streets feel emptier than usual, and the air carries that faint, biting chill that warns of winter around the corner. My car felt heavier than normal, as if the weight of the day had settled into the seats with me. It was just past 3 in the morning, and the roads near my apartment were quiet, almost eerily silent. I was taking the usual access road that cuts through a stretch of old industrial buildings to get home faster. A shortcut I've used 100 times, but tonight it felt different. The kind of different that you can't quite name until it's right in front of you. The headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating the cracked asphalt and the patches of weeds growing through the concrete like stubborn green veins. The streetlights were sparse and flickering, and in the distance, I could see the dim outlines of warehouses, their rusted roofs catching the faint light of the moon. I was halfway down the road when I noticed something on the side. A figure lying completely still next to one of those rented electric scooters people leave scattered around the city. At first, I thought it was one of the scooters fallen over, but the shape didn't match. My stomach tightened. I slowed the car and pulled over, the engine rumbling faintly in the quiet. My eyes adjusted, and I realized it wasn't just a person lying down. It was a young man, maybe in his early 20s. His body was twisted unnaturally, his arm bent at a strange angle. Panic laced through me, but I tried to stay calm. I stepped out of the car, the cold biting at my hands, and my shoes crunching on gravel and broken glass. I crouched down, checking for a pulse, but I couldn't feel anything through the thick coat he was wearing. I noticed a group of people further down the road, stumbling and swaying, laughing loudly, their voices carrying in the otherwise empty night. They were clearly drunk, probably his friends. I waved my hands frantically, shouting to get their attention. Their laughter faltered when they saw me, but instead of coming over, they looked at the body and then back at each other, hesitating. One of them finally took a half-hearted step toward the young man, then shook his head, and they all just staggered off down the road, leaving him there. My chest tightened with frustration and anger. I knew I couldn't leave him like that. I pulled out my phone and called 911, my fingers trembling. The operator's voice was calm, professional, asking questions I barely had the presence of mind to answer. I gave them the location, described the scene, and stayed on the line while they told me help was on the way. I could hear the young man breathing shallowly, or maybe it was just the wind. I wasn't sure, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. I looked around, my eyes catching every shadow, every shape in the dim glow of the streetlights, feeling the unnatural silence of a part of the city that wakes only when the night is at its darkest. Minutes felt like hours. The cold seeped through my jacket, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. I tried to make him more comfortable, moving a broken piece of glass away from his hand, adjusting his jacket so he wasn't lying directly on the gravel. I kept glancing down the road, half expecting the drunk group to come back, or for someone else to appear. Every distant noise made me flinch. The rumble of a truck engine, the scrape of tires on pavement, the occasional bark of a dog somewhere behind the warehouses. My mind raced through every possibility, every scenario that could have led to this. He could have fallen from the scooter, hit his head, maybe even been left behind by friends too drunk to notice. When the ambulance finally arrived, the flashing lights cutting through the darkness like sharp knives, I felt a mix of relief and lingering dread. Paramedics jumped out, assessing the situation quickly and efficiently, and I stepped back to give them space. They worked silently, checking vital signs, carefully lifting him onto a stretcher. I watched as they loaded him into the back of the ambulance. I didn't follow them. The siren's wail faded down the road, leaving me standing there in the cold, staring at the empty space where he had been. Driving home after that, the city felt heavier somehow, each street darker, the streetlights seeming more distant than before. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, and I found myself double-checking every intersection, every curve. It wasn't fear of someone else being there. It was the echo of what I had just witnessed, the randomness of it. One moment, life is normal. The next, someone's existence can hinge on the thin line between awareness and negligence. I parked my car and sat there for a long time before getting out. My apartment building was quiet, every step echoing in the stairwell. I kept thinking about the young man, hoping he had made it, wondering if he would remember the last moments before he ended up on that cracked asphalt. I checked the news the next morning, scanning through police reports, hoping for some closure. There was a short note about a scooter accident, an underage drinker seriously injured, friends facing charges for leaving the scene. That was it. No names, no faces, just a paragraph that barely captured what had happened. The memory of that night stayed with me, replaying in my mind every time I drove alone at night. I started taking different routes home, ones that felt less desolate, less empty, but the image of the body next to the scooter kept coming back. It changed the way I saw the streets after dark. Every abandoned alley, every flickering streetlight, every shadow in the corner of my eye now carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. I realized, in those moments of quiet reflection, that the night can be deceptive. It can make you feel isolated, give a false sense of security, and make small mistakes feel enormous. That night didn't involve ghosts, monsters, or myths. It was just life, messy, unpredictable, and sometimes terrifyingly indifferent. And yet, amidst all that, I had played a small part in making sure someone got help. A reminder that even in a chaotic world, human action matters. Months later, I finally saw him again, in a way. A news story covered the recovery of a young man from a severe scooter accident. He had survived, with months of physical therapy ahead. But he was alive. I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion wash over me. I hadn't been a hero. I had just done what anyone could do if they were paying attention. But that was enough. It was enough to make me believe, however faintly, that the night, in all its randomness and darkness, could still hold moments of clarity, of consequence, and of survival. Driving home that night, the streets felt the same, yet somehow different. I still saw the shadows, the flickering lights, the emptiness. But I also saw the potential for action, for awareness, and for small acts that could change the course of a life. It made me a little more vigilant, a little more human in a city that often feels anything but. The memory never left me, but it became a reminder. Not of fear, not of despair, but of the fragile thread that connects us all, and the quiet power of noticing when it matters most. It was past midnight when I finally left my last Uber ride of the night. The city was quiet in a way it never felt during the day. Streetlights flickered here and there their weak beams barely reaching the edges of the road. I turned onto the access road that led to my neighborhood, a narrow stretch that cut through a patch of undeveloped land. Normally, this road was empty at this hour, but tonight, something felt off. I didn't know exactly what, just that uneasy feeling you get when something in your surroundings is slightly wrong but you can't put your finger on it. The road was lined with overgrown grass and clusters of trees that created shadowed corridors on both sides. My headlights sliced through the darkness in a thin, trembling beam, revealing bits of the gravel road and the occasional patch of dirt. I had the radio on, something soft and low, more to keep myself awake than for music. The hum of the engine, the tires crunching on the gravel, and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees were all I could hear. The kind of silence that presses down on you, making every small sound feel louder than it should. About halfway down the road, I noticed something strange. At first, I thought it was just a dark patch on the ground, maybe a shadow or a pothole. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a patch. There was a figure lying on the side of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding slightly on the loose gravel. My heart jumped, and I felt a sudden cold sweat trickle down my back. The figure didn't move. At first, I thought it might be a mannequin or some prank. But no, this was a person, completely still, lying next to what looked like one of those motorized scooters people use to get around the city. I parked a few feet away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles went white. The engine hummed in protest as I left it running, and I reached for my phone with shaky fingers. The first thing I did was check for a pulse, stepping out into the cold night air. The grass was wet with dew, soaking my shoes almost instantly. The person's face was partially hidden in the shadows, but I could see his eyes were closed, his body limp. I crouched down and checked his pulse. It was faint, but there, he was alive, barely. I cursed under my breath, my mind racing, unsure whether to try moving him or just wait. I looked around and saw movement up ahead. A small group of people was staggering down the road, laughing loudly, their voices slurred. As I focused, I realized they weren't paying attention. They were completely oblivious to the person lying behind them. They were his friends, probably drunk or high, too caught up in whatever they were doing to notice that one of them had collapsed. I waved my arms frantically, shouting, but they didn't even look back. I ran toward them, waving, but they continued, disappearing around a bend in the road. I felt my stomach drop. How could they just leave him there? It was surreal and terrifying at the same time. I turned back to the boy on the ground. I didn't know him, but I felt a sense of responsibility. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, trying to keep my voice steady even though it shook. I gave them the location, the condition of the boy, and the fact that he was lying on the side of the road. The dispatcher asked questions, and I answered them as quickly and clearly as I could. While waiting, I stayed on the phone with them, trying to keep the boy conscious. I rubbed his arms lightly, hoping my touch would make him realize someone was there. His breathing was shallow, ragged, and uneven. Every minute felt like hours. The minutes dragged on, each second stretching painfully. The wind picked up, rustling the trees, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and something metallic, probably blood. I couldn't tell if it was coming from him or somewhere else, but my stomach twisted in knots. I tried to keep him talking, whispering to him softly even though I didn't expect him to answer. I kept checking his pulse, making sure he was still alive. The cold air was making my hands numb, but I didn't care. All I cared about was keeping him alive until help arrived. Then, in the distance, I saw the red and blue flashes of an ambulance. Relief washed over me like a wave. The lights reflected off the wet pavement and the trees, creating long, strange shadows that danced across the road. I waved frantically, guiding them toward us. The ambulance slowed as it approached, the paramedics jumping out and running to his side. I stepped back, exhausted, my hands trembling as they assessed him. They worked quickly, checking his vitals, stabilizing his neck, and preparing him for transport. I felt a mix of anxiety and hope, watching them work with precision, knowing he had a chance because they were here. The paramedics asked me a few questions, and I gave them the details as best I could. Then, they loaded him onto a stretcher and carried him toward the ambulance. I stood there, feeling the cold seep through my jacket, my mind spinning. I didn't know if he would survive. I didn't know what had caused him to end up there, whether it had been an accident with the scooter or something worse, but I knew I had done everything I could. The ambulance doors closed, the engine roared to life, and it disappeared down the road, leaving me alone again in the dark. I got back into my car, my hands still shaking, and started driving home slowly. The road felt longer than before, the shadows more oppressive. I kept replaying the scene in my head, the boy lying there, his friends staggering past without noticing, my frantic attempts to help. The fear hadn't left me. It had been replaced by this heavy, lingering sense of helplessness. But there was also relief. Relief that I had been in the right place at the right time, that someone was now taking care of him. As I drove down the final stretch of the access road, my neighborhood lights appearing in the distance, I realized how easily life could be taken or left in danger without anyone noticing. I parked in my driveway, sitting in the car for a long time before turning off the engine. The night was quiet now, but it felt different, heavier. I kept thinking about that boy, hoping the paramedics got him to the hospital in time, hoping he would be okay. I told myself that I had done everything I could, but the image of his still body stayed with me. I went inside, poured myself a glass of water, and tried to shake the lingering unease. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the house, every wind gust, made me tense. I kept thinking about the randomness of the night, how I had been driving alone, how one turn down a quiet road had put me in the middle of something so intense. By morning, I knew one thing for certain. Life was fragile, accidents happened in the blink of an eye, and sometimes the people around you don't even notice when someone is in danger. But there was also hope. The boy had a chance, and I had been able to help him when no one else did. That thought stayed with me, grounding me, reminding me that even in the darkest nights, small actions could make a difference. It was around 2:30 in the morning when I finally left my last Uber ride of the night. The city had that hollow, washed-out feeling that only comes after midnight. Streetlights flickered in irregular intervals, throwing thin yellow pools of light across the asphalt. The roads were mostly empty, except for the occasional delivery van or a lone car moving too fast in the distance. I turned off the main road and onto the access road that led toward my apartment. It was a narrow, barely maintained stretch of tarmac, lined on either side by overgrown grass, sporadic trees, and old utility poles whose lights were either broken or completely dead. The headlights of my car carved a path through the darkness, illuminating small patches of gravel, puddles, and tire tracks that disappeared into the black beyond. The air was cold and smelled faintly of damp earth and burnt rubber. I had the radio on low, just enough for the soft hum to distract me from the thumping of my own heartbeat. The road was quiet except for the tires crunching against the gravel and the faint whistling of wind weaving through the trees. At this hour, the silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels alive, heavy, almost aware. I could feel it pressing against the windows, making each sound, like a branch snapping in the wind or a distant dog barking, startle me more than it normally would. I kept my eyes on the road, scanning every shadow, every dark patch, knowing that in moments like these, the smallest detail could become important. About 10 minutes into the drive, as I rounded a curve where the streetlights were broken and the road seemed to vanish into darkness, I noticed a shape in my peripheral vision. It was low to the ground, dark against the lighter pavement, and frozen. At first, I thought it was just a branch or a shadow, but as I got closer, my stomach sank. It was a person, lying completely still on their side, partially in the ditch and partially on the shoulder of the road. Next to them was a motorized scooter, tipped over, one wheel spinning slightly in the puddle of water that had formed from earlier rain. My heart leapt into my throat. The figure didn't move at all, and the way they were positioned looked unnatural, tense, almost like they had collapsed mid-step. I slammed on the brakes, the tires squealing against the gravel, and came to a halt a few feet away. The engine rattled in protest, echoing in the still night. I sat frozen for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The cold air rushed in when I opened the door, filling my lungs with a sharp, biting chill. My shoes sank slightly in the wet grass as I stepped out, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I crouched next to the person, my flashlight cutting a thin line through the darkness. The boy, or maybe he was slightly older, was pale, his skin damp and cold. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was shallow, irregular, almost imperceptible at first. Panic and adrenaline clashed inside me. I could feel my pulse in my temples, my fingers trembling as I tried to assess him. He was alive, barely, but he was definitely unconscious. I checked for injuries. There was a scrape along his forehead, his arm bent awkwardly, and some bruising on his side. I cursed under my breath, realizing that if he had fallen hard, even a small movement could make things worse. I reached for my phone, dialed 911, and gave the dispatcher my location as clearly as I could. I explained that a young man had collapsed on the side of the road next to a scooter, possibly injured from a fall or an accident. The dispatcher's voice was calm, clinical, asking questions I barely heard through the ringing in my ears and the pounding of my heart. I followed their instructions, checking the boy's pulse repeatedly, trying to keep him conscious by gently shaking his shoulder and calling his name, even though I knew he probably couldn't hear me. Minutes passed like hours. The wind picked up, carrying a faint smell of wet earth and metal, probably blood. Shadows from the trees stretched unnaturally across the road, swaying in the wind. I could hear distant sounds, a dog barking somewhere far off, the rumble of tires on a side street, the occasional flutter of wings as birds disturbed by the sudden motion took flight. Every sound seemed amplified, making me flinch repeatedly. My hands were numb from the cold and the tension, but I couldn't stop checking him, couldn't stop worrying that if I looked away, something worse would happen. Then, I heard voices, loud and slurred. A small group of people appeared around the bend, staggering slightly as they walked. It was obvious they were drunk. One of them stumbled against the curb, another nearly fell into the ditch. I recognized them instinctively as the boys' friends. They were laughing, joking with each other, completely oblivious to the fact that someone was lying behind them, barely breathing. I waved my arms frantically, shouted as loud as I could, but they didn't notice. They kept walking, disappearing around the next curve without ever realizing their friend was lying in danger. My stomach turned. How could people be so blind, so self-absorbed? I wanted to shake them, scream, do something, but they were already gone. I focused back on the boy. My hands were shaking, my teeth chattering from the cold and stress. I tried to keep him conscious as best I could, rubbing his arms, talking to him softly, even though I knew he couldn't respond. His breathing was shallow, his pulse weak, and the chill of the night was taking hold. Every minute felt like an eternity. Then, in the distance, I saw the flashing red and blue lights of an ambulance. Relief hit me like a wave, and I ran a few steps toward the approaching vehicle, waving frantically to guide them. The ambulance arrived, the engine loud against the quiet night. Paramedics jumped out, moving with precision and urgency. They worked quickly, assessing the boy's condition, stabilizing him, and preparing him for transport. I stayed nearby, giving them details as clearly as I could. What I had seen, his condition, and the fact that his friends had walked past him without noticing. They thanked me briefly and continued their work. I felt an overwhelming mixture of relief, exhaustion, and lingering dread. My body was shaking, and I could feel my heart still racing, but I knew I had done everything I could. I watched as they lifted him onto a stretcher and secured him in the ambulance. The doors closed, and the vehicle's siren blared to life, cutting through the silence as it sped away toward the hospital. I stayed standing in the grass for a long moment, letting the adrenaline fade, feeling the weight of what had just happened. I had been in the right place at the right time, and that had made all the difference. When I finally got back in my car, the quiet of the road felt different. Heavy, almost reflective. The shadows seemed less threatening but more solemn, like they were keeping a silent watch. I drove the rest of the way home slowly, my mind replaying the scene over and over. The boy lying there, the oblivious friends, the ambulance speeding down the road. The night had been a stark reminder of how fragile life could be, how accidents happen in seconds, and how often people don't notice danger until it's too late. By the time I parked in my driveway, my hands still trembling slightly, I realized I was both exhausted and alert in a way that made sleep impossible. The house was quiet, the familiar sights comforting yet distant, as though I was seeing them through the lens of the night's events. I poured a glass of water, trying to steady myself, but the memory of the boy's shallow breathing, the helplessness of seeing him lying there alone, and the staggering indifference of those around him stayed with me. The sun hadn't risen yet, but I knew that when it did, the events of the night would feel like a distant memory. I told myself I had done everything I could, that he had a chance now because someone had acted. Still, the image of him, pale and limp against the dark road, would not fade quickly. It would stay with me, a reminder of the fragility of life, the responsibility we unknowingly carry, and the way the smallest choices, like stopping in time, dialing a number, or even just noticing someone in trouble, can change everything. That night, I didn't just drive home. I drove through a stark, sharp lesson in awareness and responsibility. And while I didn't know if the boy would be okay, I knew that I had been the difference between him lying there unnoticed and being alive to see the morning.